Hey everybody, and welcome to another scenario playthrough video. This is scenario number 17, Big Pier. The biggest of piers, at least until the expansion packs. We have to get 600 guests in the park by the end of October year 2, so kind of a shorter duration than we have had. And let's get straight to the point. This scenario sucks. It is just not a great scenario. Reason being is that it is all out over the water and all with construction rights, so you can't raise the land. You can't place any scenery because you can't raise the scenery up, at least in the original game. We can technically in Open RCT as we're playing, but we're not going to do that, again, playing towards the spirit of the game. So really all we've got to work with are rides, shops and stalls, and paths, and that's pretty much it. So no fences, no scenery, no landscaping, no any of that, which is kind of unfortunate because it just makes for kind of a hard park to make look decent. So we're going to try our best to make it look decent. So I started actually by splitting up the main pathway here into a little bit of a promenade here with kind of two paths on either side of a central food corridor, which we are immediately going to move all of the things out of the way because I thought maybe it would be better to put a Ferris wheel down the middle. So we're going to slide all these guys over to the side. The name of this scenario build is going to be relocations, because we're going to move pretty much everything at least once or twice during this build, just because it took a little while to kind of get the vibe of the build going, and once we kind of got it going, it just necessitated everything kind of sliding around a little bit. When you're building a pier, you kind of want it all to be solid, with some space on either side maybe, but we don't really have that luxury here. I mean, we can kind of fill it in with a bunch of awkward pathing and everything, but in general, you'd really more so use scenery and double and triple wide paths and kind of large swaths of path, I guess, more than anything, to fill in the gaps. Typically, peep wayfinding doesn't jive with that, especially in RCT 1. Again, we're using Open RCT 2, so it'd probably be more okay, but in general, we're trying to stick to that sort of classic single wide path feel, so we don't necessarily get that benefit either, which makes it a little bit of a challenge there. So kind of the way you end up doing it is almost just spamming the shops and stalls to kind of make buildings, as it were, and then try and be at least as compact or as realistic as we can get with the rides. So we are starting here with a Wooden Wild Mouse, just because I kind of wanted to do the idea of a classic boardwalk park. The intention initially was to do a Wooden Wild Mouse and a nice L-shaped out and back wooden coaster, but I realized partway through that the wooden coaster is actually not available in this scenario, which seems like a huge miss to me, but since it's sort of quintessential for a pier. But I guess we got it in Bumbley Beach, so maybe they just didn't feel like they needed to do it here. But nonetheless, we have a Wooden Wild Mouse, kind of a non-traditional layout, although still following the general tenets of what we're doing here. Now, we have to kind of play with a couple of different rules here, and one of the rules is that this map is set at high tide, because we definitely go down and pretty much touch the water with our track there, which is not ideal and probably not the best move, but in the end, I didn't want to raise the entire pathway network. If I was doing this in Sandbox, which I actually am in our Blackpool Pleasure Beach type park build through, this pier would actually be like, I don't know, 6 or 8, probably 8 tiles high off the water and not get any closer to the water than that. So there's definitely a bit of scale or scaling that has to be considered when you think about it in terms of the size of scenario play, which is in generally at a smaller scale than how I would typically play in Sandbox. So we've got this sort of 2x2 grid of path to work with, and when I was a kid playing this scenario, I never modified that path. I don't know why. I guess I felt like it was always sort of gospel that it was just there to begin with, so I'm sure I realized that you could move it or delete it or whatever, but I just never did. So we're kind of fixing that a little bit. We're still going to generally keep the 2x2 grid going on, but at the same time, we're going to modify things a little bit like we already did with the main entryway there. And then we're going to adjust things kind of further back as we go a little later on. But right now, it's just a matter of trying to build up the ride portfolio just to help build up our income. We don't have a ton of income at the moment, and we won't really get going until a fair bit later on in the scenario. But in the meantime, we have been kind of researching and building up our thrill ride collection. So we got our top spin here that we're going to sink down a little bit, and then I'm also going to adjust the pathway here like we did to create this sort of viewing area around three sides of the ride, and I'm going to sink down the top spin a little bit, kind of the same vibe as like Tolokon at Phantasialand has, minus all of the incredible theming. So you're kind of looking down at the action for it, which I think is kind of a neat way to do it. It also gives us a little bit of height variation on the pier itself, which I think is fine. So we'll put that one there for now. We will move it a little bit later, spoiler alert. But for now, it's going to live there and be green and red. So in general, as I'm trying to kind of understand what the vibe of this place is, we're trying to be super compact. So super compact being putting it by the... kind of working through one quadrant at a time, we'll say. So we started here with a car ride to kind of fill in the rest of the space, since track rides really kind of do the best at squeezing into awkward and just spaces where we don't really have room for much anything else. I did want to put the station platform kind of right up against the main pathway and then try and weave our guest path kind of through it. So that requires both the guest path to move around as well as the queue, and also the ride's got to go up and down a little bit, which is good because we don't want it to be just totally flat. That's fairly boring, and we can do at least something sort of interesting. So we're going to use a couple of these little switchback elements to get the too high because we just don't have the space to really do it in a straight shot. Also trying to get some of these crossovers in here, at least just make it at least slightly more interesting since we can't do anything with theming. So we'll just kind of set it up like that and call it a day with some of our sports cars here. Sports cars generally over racing cars because they seat two rather than one, and we might as well go for the capacity even though these car rides rarely need it, but we'll take it. So as we're researching roller coasters, it's kind of a challenge to try and figure out what is next in this whole build because it's just trying to understand where we go. Since finding out that a wooden coaster really isn't a viable option, it was sort of a bit of a question as to what this thing was going to look like, and had a couple of different suggestions out there, and you'll see pretty soon once we get into the first of the next coasters that it kind of changed the overall look of things a little bit. Once we start thinking a little bit differently, a little more modern. I think initially in my head it was more of a historic, like pleasure pier, sort of like you might see in the UK or some of the northeast US, but eventually we sort of geared it more towards a modern look of things. So I'm going to build in our little boat hire here just because we've got all the water, we might as well use it, and we can send the boats pretty much anywhere because they're not going to get stuck. So you can see we have not a lot of coaster options available for us. We're going to pick the junior coaster here and kind of start to lay it out and then abandon this thought. This will come back, although not until next episode. So just a little preview of that, trying to figure out how to wind through. It seems to me that this map among all of them is one of the best tailored for one of the windy Zier Tivoli custom coasters. So it's just kind of winds its way around the whole map and sort of has a somewhat awkward layout that kind of squeezes through existing stuff. It just kind of helps explain the park a little bit and how it grew over time, and thought that would be a good fit and also a reason to build it kind of later than anything else. So you can see we're getting all sorts of weird ride selections here, but finally we end up with a corkscrew coaster, and the first thought that I kind of came across with this one is maybe we ought to do a boomerang. So you've got Trimpers in Ocean City, Maryland, and you've got Maury's Piers in Jersey that both have boomerangs on their piers. Now, granted, most of those are, well, Trimpers isn't really even a pier, and Maury's is fully over the sand rather than the water, but again, not out of the question for something like this. So we'll build ourselves a little boomerang here. The spikes are a little bit tall here. We're going to test it out first, and then we're going to see if we can maybe lower those a little bit. Just the general issue with shuttle coasters like this in the game is that you don't have the realistic return lift on the other side that brings it up the rest of the way. And granted, you don't need a lot of height for it, but just a little bit would help, to be honest, to have that thing. But since we don't, we have to make sure it gets enough momentum from the very beginning to go the rest of the way. So with the shorter spikes there, we're going to save this design and move it elsewhere. Trying to figure out kind of the best place to move it. The other challenge here is that you can't raise and lower the printed blueprints like this. You have to have some kind of a thing underneath of it that forces it to come upwards. So I'm looking for a couple of different spots that I can stick this thing, and eventually we're going to settle on putting some pathway down here low so that we can place this thing and it'll sit up by 2 height and be a decent spot for it. Of course, we're going to drop all the people in the water, and I don't know if I haven't paid enough attention if we've actually killed anybody yet. I think we did drown 1 or 2 people in this scenario because it's a lot of people and it's hard to see, so sorry for them, but that's the risk you take, I suppose. That guy died, so there we go. There's one. Sorry that guy. But we are going to try and place this across the pathway here. What I kind of wanted to do was have a guest path sort of in the middle here, and then bring our station queue over top of the station and connect with the other path, so then you have some pretty good interaction with the whole thing. Initially keeping that white and green, since that does feel kind of like a more traditional color scheme for one of these coasters, but we will change it up here a little bit in just a second. There we go, purple and red. We named it Sea Serpent, which felt topically appropriate as well. So now we're going to do a steel looping coaster without the looping. And this is really where the overall tide of this game or a scenario changed. You might already recognize what we're doing if you know coasters. This is the Santa Monica West coaster at Santa Monica Pier in California. This is probably the most filmed coaster in history, since it's the closest thing to Hollywood and very easy to appear in commercials and TV shows and all sorts of different stuff, video games, whatever. But we're going to use this as sort of our guiding custom layout to really change the vibe of this whole park. So as we go through, this one right now, we're getting a similar shape to the real one, where we've got that little drop into a helix that's kind of high up in the air. Then there's a diagonal curve and another helix, and then it gets back to the station. We're going to get rid of that straight section there in just a second, but we needed to move it initially just to get out of the way of the carousel there. Again, we're going to move this thing after we put it in, so this is a good strategy that I tend to employ in these scenarios here lately is if I'm not entirely sure exactly where it's going to go and I've got a lot of flat ground to work with, sometimes it just makes more sense to go ahead and drop it in wherever it fits and then go ahead and move it to the right spot a little bit later on. So here's our more or less completed coaster, and I think it worked out pretty well. Not too exciting. We're not going to have a huge excitement rating on this thing or anything like that. It's not going to be a giant guest draw, but that is okay. We don't really need that. We're already over our guest goal, and we are pretty much now just building for the look and feel of the park. So the first thing first is actually deleting that whole back pathway there so we can kind of figure out where this thing goes. And now again, we got to play this little path game here with trying to get this thing up off of the water a little bit. Initially, I was trying to put it where we had built it first, where it was just too high off the ground. And then as I thought about it a little further, I thought, you know what, why don't we put it 4 off the ground? Because that way we can get a pathway underneath of it and some other rides underneath of it as well. And the thing sits up higher than the space around it. So that's what we're going to do here. And we're also going to place it right at the very far back extent of our space, so we can really maximize the room to work with on this. So we'll connect our pier on that side and now bring our pathway across, get our queue in here to fill up some space, and then kind of rebuild the back half of this park. So now we really do get away from that 2x2 grid just a little bit, and I like that better. It just feels more correct, as we go along. I did move it one tile there just a minute ago because I was thinking ahead that we would maybe want to build a monorail on this park, and it would make sense to run a monorail behind the station there. So that's what we're going to do, and leave a little bit of a space for that just later on. I started to build a couple of the little spur pieces on this pathway going underneath that diagonal curve, and then also going underneath the helix over there. And now we get to start moving stuff around. So we are going to move the swinging ship back here because it fits in very nicely. I'm being somewhat strategic about where I'm putting the queue and the exit pathways, just so we don't delete the supports for the steel coaster there. And then I also thought it makes a lot more sense to move the boomerang over to here and try and nestle it in right up against this ride, so they were kind of all squeezed in on top of each other. So we are going to move this thing, and it's going to take us a minute to figure out exactly how we want to orient this thing. But trying to figure out the best way to essentially stack rides in here and have them kind of overlapping, but not totally, just so it's a decent fit into the space. So again, try and lay our pathways down there so we can get this thing to sit up where it does. We'll delete that one and have enough money to build this guy back here. So trying to figure out exactly how this thing wants to sit in here is kind of the next step. And again, we're just continually dealing with the peeps, since I don't necessarily want to close a lot of this stuff, but the peeps are everywhere, especially when we don't have a lot of pathway, and there are already pretty much 700 guests in the park at the time. So initially we had this at the 2 height level, and trying to figure out how to get across the whole thing. So I was kind of building this large and awkward path up above. And the longer I thought about it, I got into more of a, why don't we do it one lower and kind of have it sunk in there again, and then do a little bit of path interaction around the Cobra roll. So we're going to kind of slowly rebuild this thing piece by piece and make it fit. So we can lower this up, don't have to deal with the pathway thing again. It's just easier and faster to rebuild it as we go. And now that lets us move our exit and our entrance, also get rid of this giant tall path here, and now we can do something a little bit different, which is come across here with this little bridge effectively and cross the whole space. Then we'll do our queue. And there we go. We've got ourselves a new boomerang location. We also are going to change the color a little bit. Going to do this like sickly green and purple there, which, I don't know, I feel like Pier parks often have some really terrible color schemes for their rides. So we're going to lean into that a little bit here. Now, we've also got the ability to nestle something into the Cobra roll here, just because we have the 3 across space, so we can fit any of the flat rides, really, into that area. So we'll pick a scrambler, and I'm going to do a little loop of path here, leaving some space in the middle so we still have those supports remaining. We'll connect that into the whole thing. Now we're starting to make some money, and this is where we kind of reach the point where we're actually kind of a viable park at this point. We don't really have to worry about affording stuff any longer because we've got our 2 main coasters and our, I guess, our 3rd supporting one. Now, as I say that, we've run out of money for the little car ride here, but that is fine because we'll make some money back here in a little bit. Now, we've got this little tiny square in the back here, and I thought, why not fill it with one of these little tiny car rides? So it doesn't really do much. It's probably got terrible stats. I don't know. I didn't even look. But it kind of reminds me of one of the like convoy type car rides that you see at fairs. Just a little kids ride there. So we're gonna build this up and put some racing cars on it and open it up so we get a little bit of soft guest gap boost there. And initially I blocked the whole thing with our shops and stalls until I realized, hey, maybe if we move these to the side, I can stick one piece of path in here, put a little seating area there, and call it a day. So now we've got ourselves kind of a park that feels right in this back half. And now we have to basically apply this to the front half. So the next thing that we're going to do is build our next kind of large ride, and that's going to be a flume. Again, a reminder that we're building on high tide here, which is kind of why or at least how I justify building down to the water level, which is, again, not a great choice. If I had more time and opportunity, I would raise the whole pathway network up so nothing touched the water. But instead, we're going to build this flume underneath. The inspiration here was actually Dive Coaster Vanish at Yokohama Cosmo World. So there's a flume that runs underneath of the Senyo coaster there that has the big underwater tunnel that is fairly famous or viral, I guess, in pictures and things. So I wanted to kind of wrap that thing around underneath and just give it some space there to work with. And then we're going to have a high section and then our station just nearby the whole thing. So here we wind our way around, and I don't usually do too much in the way of very high up sections of flume, but especially in this one, you kind of have that old arrow flume vibe, which was a lot of what these pier flumes became. The one that's amazing to me, one of my favorite flumes, is Mori's Piers. They've got a really, really nice one that has a lot of sections that kind of wrap around other rides and get super close to other rides and has this cool drop underneath of the pier as well. So it's got a really cool layout. I would recommend watching a POV if you haven't ridden that one. But that's a cool, worthwhile one to look into. Ours doesn't really match what's going on there. I would have ideally liked to maybe done like an SLC or something to fit in with that whole Mori's vibe to be able to do the flume and the SLC, but I don't know if we unlocked that or not, but I didn't think of building one, especially those take up so much room when you do them properly in this game. But this is a fairly sizable flume, I think, but it's stacked well enough, so it's a decent look, and I think it will work fairly well. Now we just got to fill in our station and everything. I did do this little drop right before the main lift so we can get underneath of the entrance here, and that lets us put a queue kind of in this open spot. So we're trying to use all the space that we can and just kind of fill in the area as best as possible. Connect over this pathway here and really just make the whole thing as efficient as we possibly can. So that's the main goal here, is just sort of efficiency and using all of the space. Ideally, I just don't want a lot of gaps looking down to the water in the whole thing. So we'll get this thing running and up and open. Went with the green flume boats. I'm not really sure why. When I grew up, Dutch Wonderland was one of my home parks, and they had an old arrow flume that had a red, yellow, brown, and green boats, as I recall, and I always thought that was sort of interesting. I just liked the colors. So somebody on Twitch redeemed Make Guests Sick, so we did that, and we're going to get all the vandalism and everything else that comes with it. But in the meantime, we're going to squeeze another scrambler underneath here. I know that makes 2 scramblers in the park, or 3 if I haven't deleted the other one yet. 3. But we will slowly get rid of those and fix that up a little bit. There goes the one. And eventually the other one will go away too. Now we have ourselves pretty much another 2x2 section here, although we're not connected behind the carousel here, which is what we're trying to do now, and just finish this up a little bit here and try and clean up where this carousel is. So we hadn't changed the pathway at all yet. Typically we've just done this gray tarmac or concrete type pathway, which I think is appropriate for what we're doing here. But I did want to highlight the kind of main square. So we'll put a queue here and kind of rebuild that space, and then we're going to change up the pathway just a little bit here and highlight the area around the carousel with the tile pathway. But now we're connected, so we've got everything up, and all of that makes sense now. Also trying to keep some of these supports here by building pathways around them. Also some of the sections of food stalls, just to fill in the gaps. We don't usually do a lot of food stalls when we build, but here it just kind of makes sense. It's effectively free buildings, and it's the only theming option we've got. So that is it for today, and we will catch you in the next one when we will finish up the scenario. So until next time, thank you all very much for watching. Catch you in the next one. Bye now.